There's no handbook for raising children who will love and respect you until the end. Evelyn McKinney learned that in the hardest way possible, with a burgundy dress hanging in her closet and a heavy silence filling the living room. It all began with what seemed like an innocent request helping with her daughter's wedding. But the outrageous amount of $65,000 was only the beginning of a dark game of emotional manipulation, financial abuse, and family betrayal. Maybe you think this only happens in movies or soap operas, but the truth is, families fall apart every single day over inheritance, control, and unspoken expectations. The scariest part? The traps don't always come from strangers. Sometimes, they're carefully set by the very people you love most. When Evelyn refused to pay for a luxury wedding, she never imagined that one decision would open the door to a legal ambush, complete with lawyers, power of attorney documents, and a controlling fiancé. What was supposed to be a dinner of reconciliation turned into a staged performance script and all. But Evelyn wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. This story is for anyone who's ever felt guilty for saying no, for anyone who's been manipulated in the name of family, and especially for those who need the reminder that boundaries aren't ingratitude, they're protection. Here, you'll follow every twist and turn from the dress of memory to the letter of boundaries sent after the birth of her granddaughter. You'll see how a widowed mother, a resilient grandmother, rebuilt herself with the support of a loyal son, a protective lawyer, and a silent community of survivors. Get ready. Because when the truth comes to light, it doesn't ask for permission. And sometimes, it arrives at the very moment you decide to break free. If this introduction already stirred something inside you, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next chapters of this journey of courage, freedom, and rebirth. The burgundy dress hung there, draped over the closet door, like a beautiful ghost of the past. Evelyn McKinney couldn't bring herself to let it go. It was the dress she wore the last time she danced with her husband before the accident. It was also the one she wore to watch her daughter Annie's very first ballet recital at just 8 years old. The fabric had already faded around the edges, but its meaning, that had never dimmed. Each time she held it, Evelyn remembered the little girl who once said, "Mommy, one day I'll get married in a dress more beautiful than this." And it always brought a smile. But now, all of it weighed heavy. Because the sweet little girl had grown up. And what had once been affection was now turning into demand. That rainy morning, Evelyn took the dress from the closet and laid it across her lap. She ran her fingers gently over the embroidery, as if touching a story no one else remembered. She was alone in the house she had built with her husband, now a silent space echoing with memories. Since becoming a widow, everything had changed. Raising 2 children alone was never easy, especially while keeping her dignity and paying every bill with sweat. Annie seemed to understand that until Henry came into her life. The arrival of the controlling fiancé coincided with a sharp shift in her daughter's behavior. Suddenly, everything became a demand. Her tone of voice, once sweet, now carried a subtle edge of disdain. Evelyn tried to excuse it, the way many mothers do. It's just the stress of the wedding, she's overwhelmed, she told herself. But deep down, she already knew something was wrong. Henry had that kind of charm that was really just control in disguise. Always overly polite, overly present, overly complimentary. But his eyes cold. That triggered Evelyn's maternal instinct, the same one that had kept her steady after her husband's death, that had made her work double shifts, that had never let her accept a handout. Evelyn was a widow, yes, but she wasn't weak. The problem was, for Annie, her strength had become synonymous with resistance. And Henry knew exactly how to exploit that. The first time Annie said, "You should be helping me more, Mom," Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her. She'd never heard that tone from her daughter before. She hadn't complained when she paid for Annie's education, nor when she sold family jewelry to fund a study abroad program. But now, the narrative was different. What used to be help had become an obligation. The savings Evelyn had carefully guarded for emergencies, and maybe someday for her grandchildren, suddenly became bargaining chips for a luxury wedding. And the price tag? No less than $65,000. What hurt Evelyn wasn't the money. It was how it was being asked for. As if she owed it. As if not handing it over made her unloving. Every mother wants to see her daughter happy at the altar, they told her. But Evelyn also wanted respect. She wanted to feel the same affection as before. She longed to hear a genuine thank you, not one dripping with irony. She remembered when little Annie used to write notes saying, "I love you more than chocolate ice cream." Now, she received curt messages with PDFs of budgets and wedding invitations with gold lettering. That morning, Evelyn cried in silence. Not out of weakness, but out of grief. Because what she was losing wasn't money, it was her daughter. Each seam of the burgundy dress seemed to whisper memories that time would never return. And in the midst of it all, Evelyn knew she had to stay rational. She couldn't afford to react on impulse. She could already feel the weight of emotional manipulation closing in. Henry knew how to play the game. And Annie, slowly, was becoming his pawn. It was Michael, her eldest son, who noticed first. A doctor, always observant, he picked up on the long silences during his mother's calls, the careful pauses as if she weighed every word. Michael had always been the loyal one, the son who called to check if Shed slept well, who showed up on Sundays with cake, who listened without judgment. He was the one who told her softly, "Mom, don't let anyone steal your peace. Not for a wedding, not for an inheritance." Evelyn listened, though she still didn't know how to act. She only knew something had to change. That day, as she put the burgundy dress back in the closet, Evelyn made a decision: she would not be dragged into a wedding of appearances, not by emotional blackmail, not by social pressure. Even if it cost her the connection with Annie, she would choose her integrity. The dress would go back into the closet, yes. But not as a symbol of pain, as a reminder of who she had been. And of who she now needed to become again. The request came by message. No phone call, no visit over coffee and cake like before. Just an image of a budget attached with the words, "We're going with this package. It's the minimum for a proper wedding." Evelyn stared at her phone for long minutes, waiting for a follow-up. Maybe I know it's a lot, or a "we'll talk it over." But no. The next message already contained the payment details from the decorator. The sum? Exactly $65,000. It was all or nothing. Annie and Henry were set. They wanted a luxury wedding, complete with a helicopter, live band, and personalized party favors embroidered on French linen. Evelyn asked herself when her daughter had started believing this was a priority. They had never been rich. They had always lived comfortably, yes, but only through hard work. And now, her life's work was supposed to be poured into a single day's celebration? It made no sense. Especially when Evelyn had just repaired her roof and renegotiated her health plan. What her daughter wanted went far beyond simple support. It was control over her mother's money. It tasted of financial abuse. And it wasn't the first time Henry had come up with grand ideas, always funded by someone else's pocket. When she refused, Evelyn didn't use a harsh tone. She simply said, "Annie, I can help with up to $10,000. That's already more than I planned. But anything beyond that compromises my stability." She hoped for a little understanding. But what came instead was a storm. Henry, in his always soft-spoken voice, replied on Annie's behalf, "So you're saying you won't invest in your daughter's future? That's a lack of love. Pure emotional manipulation, disguised as a noble argument." Annie sat silent on the video call. She only shook her head, as if Evelyn had just committed a crime. That conversation became the turning point. Evelyn hung up trembling, but firm. For the first time, she realized Annie wasn't just in love, she was under influence. Henry had that calculated personality. He knew exactly what to say, how to persuade, how to flip the roles. And Evelyn, a widowed mother, had already been cast as the villain. The feeling was the same as when she learned her husband was sick and no one could help helplessness. But this time, she still had a choice. And the first one would be to keep her autonomy intact. In the following days, silence filled the air. Evelyn received no more messages, no lunch invitations, no calls. Just Instagram stories of dress fittings, menu tastings, and the hashtag Smith-McKinney wedding. Each post was a stab in the heart, but also a confirmation she had been right to say no. Because love that demands financial sacrifice without gratitude is not connection, it's coercion. And Evelyn knew that if she gave in now, she would lose control over everything. Henry was already dropping hints about power of attorney and managing family assets, as if it were the most natural thing. During that silence, Evelyn turned inward, back to her memories. She reread Annie's old notes, looked at childhood photos, searching for the moment when everything had started to slip. And she realized it hadn't been all at once. It was gradual. Small requests, small concessions, small manipulations. Like the time Henry convinced Annie to sell her father's furniture to modernize the living room. Or when he suggested Evelyn put the car in their names to simplify insurance. It had been a pattern and she hadn't seen it. That week, Evelyn began writing. A letter to herself. Not a direct response to her daughter, but a letter of boundaries. A commitment to her own dignity. She wrote, "You can love, and still say no. You can want your daughter to be happy, and still refuse to finance choices that violate your values." The letter, with no recipient yet, would become the foundation of her new stance. Because Evelyn finally understood this wasn't just about a wedding. It was about freedom. About the right not to be used. About the duty to protect yourself even within your own family. And though her heart ached, Evelyn decided to wait. She wouldn't chase, she wouldn't beg for reconciliation. If Annie still carried even a spark of the sweetness she once had, she would return. But she would return with respect, not with invoices. Evelyn knew she had to brace herself for the worst. But she also knew she was rediscovering a part of herself that had slept since she became a widow, the strength to take a stand. And with that, the next chapter of this story was approaching, in an unexpected place, a dinner invitation. The phone rang on a Wednesday night, exactly at 7:12 p.m. Evelyn was on the couch, watching a documentary about dysfunctional families' irony at its finest. Annie's name lit up the screen, and Evelyn's heart raced. It was the first time her daughter had called since the 65,000 argument. She answered, steady but kind. Annie sounded different. Softer. Almost sweet. "Mom, I've been thinking. Could we have dinner at Franco's, like we used to?" Evelyn hesitated for a moment, remembering that restaurant was where they used to celebrate birthdays. It felt like an olive branch. And despite her doubts, she said yes. In the days leading up to dinner, Evelyn wrestled between hope and caution. Part of her wanted to believe Annie was reaching out of love, out of longing, out of conscience. The other part remembered Henry's cold eyes and the calculated silence of recent weeks. Still, she went. She chose a light blue blouse, wore a necklace Annie had given her last Christmas, both a gesture of affection and a quiet test. She wanted to see if her daughter would notice. She walked to Franco's with the burgundy dress in her mind, as if those memories could shield her from fresh wounds. When she arrived, the atmosphere felt staged. Annie was already there, beautiful as always, perfectly made up but tense. Henry was there too. Yes, he was there. Evelyn pretended to be surprised and smiled politely. "I thought this would just be the two of us." Annie quickly replied. Henry insisted. "He really wants to reconnect." Evelyn swallowed hard. She sensed this dinner had a script and she was the only one who hadn't been given a copy. They sat. Ordered wine. Made small talk. Evelyn tried to relax, until the strike came. "Mom, we've been thinking. And we want to propose something that will make everything easier." The proposal was delivered like some irresistible offer. Henry, in his ever-polite tone, suggested Evelyn sign a power of attorney to simplify the wedding arrangements and speed up important financial decisions. Evelyn kept her face calm, but her stomach knotted. This wasn't reconciliation. It was a trap. Henry pulled an envelope from his folder and placed it on the table. "Here are the documents, everything prepared. All you have to do is sign." Annie looked at her mother with a smile that never reached her eyes. Evelyn took a deep breath and politely excused herself to the restroom. It was there, staring into the mirror, that Evelyn made one of the most important decisions of her life. She pulled out her phone and sent Michael a short message: "Son, I need you. Urgent." No explanation. She returned to the table with the same composed posture, as if nothing had changed. She smiled, ordered dessert, and carried on with the conversation. But inside her, everything had shifted. The emotional manipulation was clear as daylight now. This wasn't a daughter seeking reconnection, it was a couple trying to corner her legally. In the final minutes of dinner, Evelyn shifted the game. "You know, Henry, I was reading about powers of attorney the other day. They're powerful tools, but also dangerous in the wrong hands." The tension at the table spiked. Henry tried to keep his charm intact, of course. "That's why we brought a simplified version. But don't worry, it's all standard." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Nothing is standard when it comes to trust. And I trust time more than I trust haste." Annie looked away. Evelyn finished her coffee, stood with elegance, and said, "Thank you for dinner. When you're ready to have a real conversation, I'll be available. Without documents." And she walked out, leaving a deafening silence behind her. Outside, the wind was sharp against her face. Evelyn walked with light steps but a heavy heart. Still, there was a thread of pride growing inside her. For the first time in a long time, she hadn't caved. She hadn't explained herself, hadn't justified, hadn't tried to smooth things over. She had simply taken a stand. She knew the next hours would be crucial. But she trusted Michael, the loyal son who always showed up when the ground beneath her started to crack. Evelyn knew the war was only beginning. But for the first time, she had an army, even if it was an army of one. 2 days later, Evelyn received a new message. This time from an unknown number. It was formal, almost corporate. "We request your presence at a meeting regarding the formalization of legal instruments related to asset management. Signed, Henry Smith," followed by 3 attorneys' names. Evelyn felt the chill climb up her spine. This was no longer just emotional manipulation. This was a legal offensive. The reconciliation dinner had been nothing but a smokescreen. Now they were coming full force: lawyers, power of attorney, control over her estate. Evelyn closed her eyes, took a long breath, and replied, "I'll be there. And I'll bring my son." On the appointed day, she wore the burgundy dress. Not for vanity, but for strength. It was the symbolic armor of a woman who had buried a husband, raised 2 children, and survived every stumble life had thrown at her. She arrived at Henry's office at exactly 10 a.m. A cold room, sterile decor, a receptionist who didn't smile. Inside, Henry and 3 suited men. One extended his hand with false warmth. "Mrs. McKinney, we're here to make things easier, right? Ideally, we'd get this signed today." On the table, a thick stack of papers. Evelyn simply sat down, crossed her legs, opened her purse, and pulled out her phone. "Before we begin, my son is on his way." Henry's expression tightened slightly. "Does he know what this is about?" Evelyn smiled calmly. "He knows my story. And he knows my clarity." The lawyers exchanged glances. One of them began leafing through the documents, explaining clauses that would give Henry total control over Evelyn's finances, properties, and even medical decisions should she ever be deemed incapacitated. A plan clearly abusive, hidden under technical jargon. Evelyn listened with the serenity of someone who already knew her answer. Each clause only confirmed what she already felt: Henry wasn't driven by love. He was driven by ambition. By the 3rd clause, one of the lawyers mentioned the signature would be irrevocable for an indefinite period, unless overturned by a court. Evelyn almost laughed. Ironic they wanted to use the law to imprison a woman who only wanted peace. She looked Henry straight in the eye and asked bluntly, "If I refuse, what happens to my daughter?" The silence was cutting. Henry replied, "She'll suffer. She'll pull away. You'll lose her." That was when Evelyn understood this was blackmail disguised as protection. But she had already lost too much, and she wouldn't lose herself. The door opened with a sharp click. Michael walked in. White coat, serious face, a small folder in his hand. "Good morning, gentlemen. I'm here to represent my mother." All eyes turned, and Evelyn felt relief wash over her like warm water. Michael sat beside her, opened the folder, and began reading the documents out loud. Clause 7, Item C. This is a legal absurdity. No woman in full possession of her faculties should sign this. Henry tried to cut him off, but Michael stood firm. What you're attempting here is the financial exploitation of a lucid, sober, independent woman. The lawyers shifted uncomfortably. The youngest began to sweat. Michael, steady, produced a recent medical report, signed by 2 specialists, attesting to Evelyn's full mental capacity. Any attempt to pressure her into signing this will be considered financial abuse and emotional manipulation. And we have witnesses. Henry shot up from his chair. This is a personal attack. Michael answered firmly no. This is family defense. Under the table, Evelyn squeezed her son's hand. For the first time, she felt she didn't have to fight alone. The meeting ended without a signature, without an agreement, without smiles. Evelyn rose calmly, looked Henry in the eye, and said, "You almost convinced me." Almost. And she walked out with firm steps. She knew Annie hadn't come out of shame or complicity. But in that moment, her daughter's absence hurt less than the idea of surrendering to such a cruel scheme. In the elevator, Michael said, "Mom, this isn't over." Evelyn replied, "I know. But now I have someone by my side who never tried to buy me." And that was the beginning of the turning tide. That very afternoon, back home, Evelyn sat on the couch with a cup of chamomile tea. Her hands still trembled slightly, but her heart was finding its rhythm again. The silence of the living room was comforting. Michael was in the kitchen, organizing documents, talking on the phone. Evelyn watched him with gratitude. This man with firm voice and calm eyes was the same boy who, at 7 years old, had cried quietly at his father's funeral so his mother wouldn't see. Now, he was the one protecting her. When he hung up, he walked over. "Mom, we have options. But first, I need you to hear something." He put the phone on speaker. A woman's direct voice came through. "Mrs. McKinney, this is Louise Qualls. Michael explained the situation to me. I'm an attorney specializing in elder asset protection. And frankly, what they attempted with you is illegal." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. Not from fear, but from relief. Finally, someone on the other end of the line wasn't trying to persuade her, but to defend her. Louise continued, "My immediate suggestion is this: we establish an irrevocable trust with Michael as trustee. That blocks any future attempts to access your assets without court approval." Evelyn nodded, even without fully understanding the terms. She trusted Michael and now, that steady voice too. But before deciding, she called her bank herself. The clerk confirmed that Henry had already tried to access her account using a code being prepared for the power of attorney. Evelyn swallowed hard. This was no longer speculation, it was intrusion. The bank call was the final confirmation. And also fuel. Evelyn requested a detailed statement, instructed that all movements required double authentication, and changed every credential. With papers in hand, Evelyn and Michael spent the rest of the afternoon organizing everything. They listed accounts, assets, properties, sentimental belongings. It was like piecing together a puzzle of her own life. Evelyn didn't complain, quite the opposite, she felt stronger. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt she was regaining control. And it had all started with something so simple: a phone call. A cry for help. "I need you." Sometimes, a turning point begins with an ordinary phrase, one that carries centuries of silence finally breaking. By the end of the day, as the sky glowed golden with sunset, Evelyn wrote a short line in her notebook: "I asked for help. And I was heard." It was both confession and celebration. For so long, she had believed asking for help was weakness. That a widowed mother had to handle everything alone. That relying on her son was a burden she shouldn't impose. But now she saw clearly Michael's loyalty was a bridge, not an obligation. It was the bond that held her steady while everything else tried to collapse. Later that night, Louise called again. This time, to arrange a home visit. Well, prepare everything. And well, also record a video statement of you, attesting to your full awareness. That serves as evidence in any court. Evelyn agreed. And for the first time in weeks, she slept with peace of mind. She knew the next steps would be bureaucratic, but necessary. The game had changed. Before, she had been the target. Now, she was setting the pace. All because of one phone call, the one that flipped the script of submission and put the power back into the hands of the one who deserved it. The next day, Evelyn called the community center where she used to take embroidery classes. She wanted to return. She felt the need to surround herself with real voices, human eyes. People who didn't see her as a walking wallet, but as a person with stories. As she confirmed her enrollment, another call came, this time, from Annie. Evelyn answered with calm voice. "Hi, Mom. I just wanted to know how you're doing." Evelyn replied, "I'm getting stronger." Annie hesitated. "Does that mean you'll reconsider Henry's proposal?" Evelyn answered firmly, "No. It means I remembered who I am." And so, in a quiet house filled with the scent of tea and the rustle of signed papers, Evelyn reclaimed not just control over her assets, but her own story. The phone that once brought blackmail now delivered relief. And more than anything, it proved that freedom doesn't come with shouting, it begins with a simple choice not to stay silent. And Evelyn had much more left to say. Michael returned to his mother's house the following Saturday. No white coat, no rush, just a smile and a black folder under his arm. That was how Evelyn loved to see him most, in son mode, not doctor mode. He arrived with a lemon cake, her favorite, and said, "Today, we put everything in order." Evelyn opened the door and, for the first time in weeks, let out a genuine laugh. His presence was like sunlight spilling through the window after a long storm. And she knew this would be a decisive day. The papers were ready. The plan set. And Michael, unshakable. After coffee, they sat in the living room. Michael opened the folder and began explaining each step calmly. "This is the document that blocks third-party access. This one protects your joint account. Erase the trust contract, and here the letter of boundaries." Evelyn paused. "Letter of what?" Michael smiled. "It's your official statement of what you accept and what you no longer accept." It sounded strange, but powerful. A legal way of saying enough. Evelyn held the paper with trembling hands. It was more than a document. It was the translation of everything she felt but never knew how to say. Reading the letter out loud was like lifting a weight off her chest. "I love my daughter. But I do not authorize her or her fiancé to manage my assets. I do not accept decisions made without my participation. I do not accept emotional blackmail." Evelyn stopped, took a deep breath, and continued. "I am a lucid, conscious, widowed, and free woman. And I intend to remain that way." When she finished, tears rolled quietly down her face. Michael said nothing. He simply placed his hand over hers. And in that silent gesture, Evelyn felt that everything would change. That afternoon, they were visited by Louise Qualls. The lawyer brought more documents, validated the signature on the letter, reviewed every item of the trust, and suggested Evelyn record a short video. "Just say who you are and what you're deciding." Evelyn, a bit shy, straightened herself on the couch, looked at the camera, and said, "My name is Evelyn McKinney. I am 63 years old. I am a widow. And I am protecting what I built with dignity." Pause. "And no one is going to take that from me." Louise stopped the recording and said, "Perfect. Now, no one touches your assets without going over the law. And over your will." Later, Evelyn and Michael went for a walk. The neighborhood felt different, not because the streets had changed, but because she walked differently. Lighter. As if the weight she had carried was now shared. They talked about the past, laughed at old stories, remembered how Annie loved hot chocolate and hated waking up early. Evelyn didn't speak badly of her daughter. But she didn't hide the pain either. "She's going to hate me," Michael replied, "maybe for a while. But one day, she'll realize what Henry tried to do. And she'll remember that you had courage." Evelyn simply nodded. She didn't expect miracles. Just peace. On the way back, they passed a park where Evelyn used to play with the kids when they were little. She saw an elderly woman helping her granddaughter ride a bike. Michael noticed his mother's teary eyes. "Your time will come too, Mom." Evelyn smiled sadly. "If I'm allowed." Michael gently held her arm. "You will. But it will be on your terms. Without giving up who you are." Evelyn took a deep breath. For the first time, the idea of being a grandmother didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a possible future, as long as it was built with respect. That night, Evelyn opened the chest where she kept her husband's memories. She pulled out an old letter he had written when he learned of his illness. "Take care of yourself. Don't be kind to those who don't respect you. Our daughter will need boundaries even if she doesn't understand them now." Those words gained a new meaning. Evelyn closed her eyes, hugged the letter, and understood she wasn't going against her daughter. She was fulfilling the hardest role of a mother, loving with firmness. Loving with limits. Loving even when it meant saying no. And that night before bed, Evelyn did something she hadn't done in a long time. She set an alarm on her phone for the next day. She had a bank appointment, a meeting with Louise, and tea scheduled with a new neighbor named Janet. Little by little, life was finding rhythm again. Without promises of reconciliation, without rushing forgiveness. But with structure. With protection. And with the certainty that Evelyn was no longer just a widowed mother being pressured by a controlling fiancé. She was a woman rebuilding her freedom, with the help of a loyal son and a protective lawyer. The revelation came on a rainy afternoon, when Evelyn received a thick envelope delivered by a courier. It was from Louise. Inside was a neatly organized compilation of photos, reports, and receipts. Michael, already informed, was at her side as she began to flip through. The first photo was of Evelyn's house, taken from afar, clearly by someone hiding. The second showed her entering the bank. The third, leaving the pharmacy. All dated, timed, arranged like a dossier. Evelyn's eyes widened. "What is this?" Michael replied firmly, "An investigation. Ordered by Henry." Along with the photos were documents from a private investigator hired to gather information on Evelyn's assets. The list included the estimated value of her house, cars, accounts, even collectibles. Evelyn ran her fingers across the paper as if touching an open wound. "He spied on my entire life." Michael answered and tried to anticipate any move you might make. The feeling was one of total invasion. But along with the disgust came clarity. Henry's behavior wasn't exaggeration, it was strategy. A predator in a groom's suit, ready to capture an inheritance by any means. Louise had also attached screenshots of messages exchanged between Henry and a friend obtained legally after a financial abuse complaint. In one of them, he wrote, "She's just another guilty old lady. Push hard enough and she'll sign everything." Evelyn shuddered. She had never imagined someone could refer to her that way. It was like watching her humanity reduced to a profit opportunity. And the worst part? Annie knew. The messages mentioned that the daughter was breaking down the mother's resistance. Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply closed her eyes. And there, in the silence, she decided this war now had names, documents, and proof. The final pages were unauthorized medical reports Henry had tried to obtain. He had attempted to get evaluations suggesting senility or confusion in Evelyn. He visited 2 offices, posing as a concerned relative. In both, he was turned away. But he tried. And that attempt alone was enough to constitute attempted fraud. Seeing it all, Evelyn felt anger. But also relief. Now she had more than arguments, she had evidence. It wasn't just a mother's intuition anymore, or a nagging impression. It was a clear plan of financial abuse, mapped out step by step. With Louise's help, they decided to file everything with family court and begin the most robust legal protection process. This, Evelyn, is what we call emotional and legal shielding. Michael added if he tries anything again, he'll leave in handcuffs. Evelyn laughed for the first time that day. A bitter laugh, but liberating. He messed with the wrong woman. And the wrong family. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. She was supported, protected, surrounded by people who not only listened but acted on her behalf. In the days that followed, Evelyn returned to her routine. But now, with sharper eyes. She reconnected with friends, alerted neighbors, shared with two trusted women what was happening. And she was surprised by similar stories. Other women, other mothers, had also been pressured by sons-in-law, nephews, even children. That made Evelyn realize her case wasn't unique, it was just another symptom of a systemic problem. What once seemed personal now revealed itself as a silent epidemic: older women being exploited under the disguise of help. This awakening was a trigger. Evelyn began writing down names, situations, conversations. What once was pain now became material. Not for revenge but for prevention. The woman who once only wanted peace now wanted impact. She felt her story could serve as a warning. That other women needed to know it was possible to say no. That it was legitimate to protect what was theirs. And, more than that it wasn't just about money, it was about identity, autonomy, freedom. Evelyn would no longer be a spectator. Now, she was the protagonist. And she was ready to show it to the world. Louise calls arrived without fanfare, but carried authority in the very way she closed her bag. Short, with straight gray hair, wearing a dark blue suit and eyes that cut through any disguise. Evelyn welcomed her with hot coffee and oatmeal cookies, and in less than 5 minutes, it felt like they'd known each other for years. "I'm not here just as a lawyer. I'm here as a woman. And as a woman, I will not tolerate exploitation disguised as affection." Evelyn smiled. It was the first time someone had defined what she felt so precisely. This wasn't just about laws. It was about respect. During the meeting, Louise calmly explained each clause of the irrevocable trust they were about to formalize. "This isn't a prison, Evelyn. It's a shield. It means you can live with freedom, without fear that someone will try to control your assets or your story." Michael participated actively, asking questions, adjusting terms, making sure everything aligned with his mother's values. It was a collective construction, where each clause represented not just patrimonial protection, but emotional security. And Evelyn was present in every decision. For the first time, she felt she was writing her own safety. The trust named Michael as trustee, legally responsible for ensuring Evelyn's resources were used according to her expressed wishes. This even protects you from yourself, if one day you need help and can't ask. But only if it's truly necessary. Until then, you're in charge of everything. Louise was firm but humane. She presented laws as tools of defense, not bureaucracy. And that made all the difference. Evelyn signed the documents calmly, with steady handwriting, knowing she was shielding her future with her own hands. At the end of the process, Louise pulled out an extra document, the contingency plan. "This is the plan B. If Henry tries to file anything, this immediately enters with counter-evidence, including medical reports, your video, and copies of your bank records." Evelyn looked at it like one might look at armor. "You thought of everything." Louise replied, "Without vanity, I've seen this happen before. But it will never happen to you again." The firmness in that sentence echoed inside Evelyn like a promise. She was safe. Finally surrounded by people who wanted to see her free, not controlled. After the formalization, Louise stayed in frequent contact. She often sent messages asking how Evelyn was, if she needed anything, or simply sharing news about elder rights. They became unlikely friends. Two women who, in their own ways, knew the weight of loneliness and the strength it takes to face it. Evelyn began to see Louise as more than a lawyer. She was a guardian. A reminder that justice can also have a female face and a caring voice. Their relationship became a quiet example of how the right alliances transform lives. Michael, for his part, didn't hide his admiration. Louise is the kind of woman who changes the world without making noise. Evelyn agreed. And she knew that without Louise, she might have caved. Because Henry's words were seductive, and Annie's silence piercing. Louise entered like someone turning on the light in a room where doubt had settled. She didn't need to shout. She simply showed the truth. With evidence, with firmness, with the law. And that's what Evelyn began telling other women at the community center. That having a lawyer like her isn't just a right. It's a silent revolution. Inspired by Louise, Evelyn began studying more about legal protection. Not to become a specialist, but to understand the mechanisms that so often put women like her at risk. She read books, attended meetings, asked questions. If I had known this before, she said, and Louise replied, you know it now. And you're already teaching others. Evelyn began bringing pamphlets to the center, inviting friends to lectures, encouraging tough conversations. What once had been a solitary trauma was now a tool of awareness. And at the heart of it stood Louise. And so, with the support of a protective lawyer, a loyal son, and a strength she hadn't known she had, Evelyn not only defended herself, she created a new battlefield. One where women traded silence for voice, fear for information, submission for structure. Louise Qualls was more than a name on a contract. She was a bridge. Between fear and justice. Between abuse and freedom. And Evelyn crossed that bridge without looking back. The news of the trust hit Henry like a punch to the stomach, the kind you see coming but can't avoid. As soon as he learned Evelyn had formalized the protection of her assets with Michael as trustee, he tried to react with arrogance. He sent messages claiming it was unnecessary, that Evelyn had been misled. But the facade soon cracked. And when he discovered that the evidence of his manipulation was in Louise's hands, he crumbled. He tried intimidation, then begging. He even sent flowers with a card asking for dialogue. Evelyn just looked at them, turned around, and threw it all in the trash. Annie, on the other hand, sank into a deafening silence. No calls, no replies, no visits. Evelyn imagined her daughter's internal conflict. She knew that, in some way, Annie was also Henry's victim. But that didn't erase the fact Annie had chosen his side. When the truth came out, Annie didn't apologize. She just pulled away. Evelyn didn't insist. She had learned through tears and chamomile tea that motherhood is not a contract of unconditional acceptance. A mother's love continues, even with limits. And in that moment, distance was the only boundary possible. Michael suggested a conversation. Maybe now is the time to leave space for her to return. On her own. Evelyn considered. She didn't want to cut ties forever. She did want Annie to wake up. But she wasn't willing to be the safety net of someone who hadn't yet understood the damage done. That's when she decided to write. Not a reconciliation letter, but a letter of clarity. A letter of boundaries. Without shouting, without accusations. Just truths. Annie, my love remains here. But my protection now extends to myself as well. I no longer accept silence as an answer, nor manipulation as affection. I am open to new beginnings as long as they're honest. When Henry learned about the letter, he had his final outburst of control. He called Evelyn, threatening to expose supposed family secrets if she didn't reconsider. Evelyn listened in silence. When he finished, she simply said, "You've lost the key to the door. And without a key, no one gets in." Then she blocked his number. Michael, always vigilant, reinforced the security protocols and reassured his mother. Now he's being exposed. And men like him don't know how to act without a hiding place. Louise prepared a final notice: any further direct contact from Henry would be treated as harassment. The impact spread beyond Evelyn's home. At the hospital where Henry worked as an administrator, questions began to arise about his ethics. An anonymous dossier likely sent by one of the lawyers who had abandoned the case exposed questionable practices involving patients and financial decisions. Evelyn didn't celebrate, but she understood the universe has its way of correcting what's out of place. And sometimes, the downfall of those who think they're untouchable comes from within. Henry began losing ground, trust, prestige. And Annie remained silent. But now, it was a disconnected silence, not a controlling one. With the storm easing, Evelyn dedicated herself to self-care. She updated her medical exams, renewed the garden, resumed regular walks. She began writing about what she had lived through. Not for revenge, but as a record. If I don't tell this story, others will keep thinking they have to endure everything alone. Transforming pain into narrative became her healing. And little by little, her daughter's silence, which once hurt, now just occupied space. Evelyn no longer begged for return. She simply moved forward. Free. Intact. Stronger than ever. Annie, at last, sent a brief message. Months later, I hope you're well. No apologies, no explanations. Evelyn read it, smirked, and replied, I am. And I hope you are too. When you want to talk truthfully, I'll be here. And that was that. It was a beginning, or the most Annie could give at the time. Evelyn no longer carried unrealistic expectations. She had learned that even love needs boundaries. That trust isn't renewed by blood ties, but by actions. And that sometimes, protecting yourself is the greatest act of love a mother can give a child. That night, before bed, Evelyn looked at the burgundy dress in her closet. She still wouldn't wear it again, but now, it didn't remind her of pain. It reminded her of strength. And of the certainty that no matter how much the world tries to silence women like her, there will always be a way to rise. To protect themselves. To say enough. And that, in itself, was liberating. When the threats stopped and the papers were signed, Evelyn felt something she hadn't in months: pure air filling her lungs without heaviness. For the first time, the house felt safe, not because of locks or cameras, but because she no longer lived at the mercy of others' will. She was no longer the center of a war. And in this new calm, she met Janet Waters, her new neighbor. Janet was 67, sharp-witted, with a story that echoed parts of her own, also a mother, also hurt by her children's choices, also rising again after years of silence. The two quickly formed a bond. They had tea, talked about life, shared laughter and scars with equal ease. Janet suggested Evelyn join her at a meeting at the community center, a place where older women shared experiences and learned about rights, emotional health, and financial life. Curious, Evelyn went. She sat timidly in the back, but soon heard faces and voices telling stories that felt like her own. She wasn't the only one. Not the first. And there, in that circle of women, something inside her awakened. Little by little, Evelyn went from listener to active participant. She spoke about her experience clearly, without victimhood, but with the courage of someone who had survived and learned. Her words began to draw attention. Some women identified, others cried, others asked for guidance. Janet, proud, said, "You don't know the good you're doing." And Evelyn began to believe it. What Henry had tried to turn into ruin, she was turning into structure. Pain had become raw material for something larger. And Evelyn was starting to believe it. Michael, seeing this new chapter, was moved. "I've never seen you so alive, Mom." And Evelyn, smiling, would say, "I've never been so much my own." With Louise's support, she began helping other women understand powers of attorney, inheritances, and how to spot signs of family financial abuse. Not as a lawyer, but as someone who had weathered the storm. Now, she wasn't just rebuilding her autonomy, she was teaching others to do the same. 6 months later, Evelyn had become a respected reference at the community center. She was no longer just the woman who had survived an emotional scam, she was the one teaching others how not to fall into the same trap. Her days were filled with new commitments, meetings with support groups, participation in events about women's rights in later life, recording educational videos with Louise. She had found a new role, that of a guide. Together with Louise, she developed a practical handbook, easy to read, explaining the dangers of signing powers of attorney without care, how to protect assets, identify emotional manipulation, and create conscious wills. The handbook spread through churches, neighborhood associations, and social media groups. Evelyn began receiving invitations to speak not out of vanity, but authority. The kind of authority that comes from lived experience, from pain transformed into knowledge. In her exchanges with other women, Evelyn realized how often older women's voices were ignored. Many felt guilty for setting limits with their children. Others carried shame for saying no after a lifetime of giving. Evelyn always repeated being a mother is not being property. It's being presence. And presence should never be forced. It was a new emotional vocabulary. A new kind of literacy, one that taught self-love, self-respect, and practical protection. With Michael, her relationship was stronger than ever. He was still the loyal son, but now also a friend, a partner. They talked about everything from new ideas for the center to plans for a future trip. "You deserve to see the ocean again, Mom." And Evelyn began allowing herself to dream. She bought a new dress, painted her nails red, updated her haircut. Simple things that once felt far away were now rituals of affirmation. Evelyn was alive and celebrating it. The arrival of Eleanor, her first granddaughter, came through a photo on social media. Evelyn froze when she saw the image on Annie's profile. A baby wrapped in a white blanket, eyes closed, a serene expression. The caption was plain: "Eleanor is here." No mention of Annie's mother. No direct message. Just a post, as if announcing something to the world without wanting to involve certain people. Still, Evelyn cried. Because despite everything, there was love in that picture. And there was hope. A few days later, Annie sent a message. She said Evelyn could meet the baby with conditions. Among them, Henry had to be present, certain topics couldn't be discussed, and Michael and Louise couldn't be involved. It was another attempt at control. Evelyn took a deep breath. She knew she couldn't accept such terms, not anymore. So, with firmness and gentleness, she wrote the letter of boundaries. It began: "I love you. And I love your daughter. But I cannot accept being received as someone who needs to be watched." The letter continued: "I will always be open to love, but not to surveillance. Not to manipulation. Eleanor is welcome in my life, and so are you, as long as you both come with truth and respect." It was one of the hardest letters she had ever written. But also one of the most necessary. She sent it by email. And waited. The silence that followed was long, but it didn't hurt like before. Because now Evelyn knew that peace didn't come from concessions. It came from coherence. Weeks later, she received a letter in the mail. A simple envelope, no return address. Inside, a photo of Eleanor smiling in a nurse's arms. On the back, a handwritten note: "She already smiles with her eyes." Evelyn held the picture, overwhelmed. It wasn't much. But it was something. She placed the photo next to the burgundy dress, like planting a seed without knowing if it would bloom. But with faith. From then on, Evelyn no longer waited for forced reconciliations. She continued her mission at the center, speaking about grandchildren who arrive before forgiveness, about boundaries as an act of love, and about how hard-won freedom should never be traded for moments of conditional affection. Eleanor, even at a distance, was already part of her story. And Evelyn knew that one day, she would understand. That the grandmother who wasn't there in the first months was the same one who cleared a path for other grandmothers to be respected. Evelyn McKinney didn't win with shouting or scandals. She won with boundaries. With structure. With the courage to say enough where for years she had only said it's fine. Her story wasn't about breaking ties, it was about rebuilding them in a healthy way, starting with self-love. She showed that the truest act of love can be silence, firmness, and the choice to protect yourself. That dignity is not negotiable, not in the name of motherhood, not in the name of tradition. And that yes, there is still time to reclaim everything they tried to take: autonomy, freedom, and your own voice. If this story touched you in any way, whether because you're living something similar or because you want to prevent others from going through it, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, we share real, painful, and transformative stories that help you see there's still time to protect yourself, to begin again, to live. Because once you understand that your peace is worth more than anyone's approval, the whole world begins to change, starting from within.